Today I decided to give you guys a review of Return to Silent Hill. This is the third of the Silent Hill films, and the second to be directed by Christoph Gans. It's essentially a standalone sequel, although there are some slight ties to the original film. So without further ado, let's get started. The basic premise of the film sees a man named James Sunderland, who is an artist, and after the death of the love of his life, he receives a letter from her asking him to return to Silent Hill, a place in which they used to live and fell in love with each other. James takes off in the middle of the night after a night of binge drinking and reckless behavior, and after falling asleep at an outside station, wakes up in his car and slowly makes the trek to the town of Silent Hill. Once there, he meets several people who are disturbed, and eventually all hell breaks loose when the other world of Silent Hill becomes unleashed, and it's up to James to navigate this hellscape in order to try to find the love of his life, Mary. That's the basic premise of the movie, and it's essentially a loose adaptation of the Silent Hill 2 video game. Now, there are differences to the game, and I'll get into those more, but I figured we get to the positives first. First and foremost, I think that the direction in this film is very good. That's not to say every shot is great, but for the most part, the camera angles, the lighting, and all the visuals not only look very similar to Silent Hill 2, but it also is just a very well-directed movie from a cinematography standpoint. That's not to say the visuals always hold up, and I'll get into that more, but it is a well-shot film that captures the look and feel of the game very well, at least in terms of location and atmosphere. Another positive that I found from the film is the actual pacing itself. Now, it's not exactly the same pace as the game, but it does move along at a pretty brisk pace, and there's never really any point where I was bored or felt like scenes were lasting too long. Everything moves along at a fairly straightforward motion. Now, some people may find that to be a negative, and that's understandable, but as far as I was concerned, I thought the movie kept me entertained and kept my attention rather well, and I do like how it moves from different set pieces, different locations. I do have my problems with those locations and set pieces, but the way in which we get there, I think, is actually handled relatively well. Another positive would have to be the soundtrack by Akira Yamaoka. He also does the soundtrack for the video games, including Silent Hill 2. And if you enjoy the music in those games, especially the second one, you'll feel right at home with the soundtrack to this movie. Everything has either a melancholy type sound to it, or a almost disturbing and somewhat grinding like rock soundtrack in certain scenes, and it all works very well. It's a little hard to explain some of it, but if you play the games, you'll be right at home with the soundtrack, and I think it's great that they actually got him to do the music for the film, because it really does help put you in the mood that you're in when playing the second game, although obviously to varying degrees. So while I enjoy the look and atmosphere of the movie, the soundtrack, and the direction itself, I also like some, and I really do have to specify that, some, but not all of the characters. I think James, although he is much different than he is in the video game, and much more of a carefree, almost rock star type before going to Silent Hill, I think he's a pretty good protagonist, and I did find him rather enjoyable. Don't get me wrong, this is not the James that you know from the video games, but I did enjoy his character. Jeremy Irvine is an interesting portrayal of James, and while not exactly game accurate, does portray a lot of the emotions that the character had in that game, although in more of a laid-back, probably slightly more contemporary version of the character that I did enjoy, even though it wasn't completely accurate. And I also did enjoy Hannah Emily Anderson as Maria, although she did play a couple of other characters in the movie that I wasn't as fond of. She does a good job as the main character's love interest, and I think she gives a pretty good performance as well. Now that we've talked about the good aspects, we'll get into the mediocre and underwhelming aspects, and then we'll move on to the straight negatives. First and foremost, I'd have to say that as an adaptation of Silent Hill 2, this is very much a loose adaptation. I know that will probably bother some people, and I have to say that I didn't mind it. I do like how it follows a lot of events from 2 and keeps the same general story, but also kind of tweaking it a bit. The reason why this is kind of a mediocre aspect, though, is because the story we get here is not really the story of 2, just kind of a skeletal version of it with events changed around and characters completely recontextualized. So if you're going into this movie wanting the true Silent Hill 2 experience on the big screen, you're not really going to get it. But you are going to get enough aspects of it, which actually makes it kind of interesting. That's why this is more of like a underwhelming aspect, because you do kind of get what you want, and in terms of the film looking like Silent Hill 2, and even having much iconography and visuals from the game, but the story is pretty much its own thing. That's not to say the basic premises isn't the same. It is about a man trying to find his dead lover in a town. That is pretty much the same, but the events play out in a completely different manner, although all the main locations are still here. So it's a bit of a mixed bag in terms of what you get versus what you probably expect from an adaptation. So if you go into the movie knowing that, it's not really a negative per se, but it's not going to be completely fulfilling if you're a fan of the games, because you're not going to really get something that's completely accurate. It's about halfway there. Another underwhelming aspect would have to be the handling of the side characters. Eddie, for instance, who was potentially an outright psychopath, is in this version, but they don't really touch on how he's previously bullied or how he's slowly losing it. Instead, we get that he doesn't really care for most people, which is accurate to Eddie from the game. But we also find out that he's basically just lost his mind and doesn't really want anything to do with James once he finds out James summons Pyramid Head, who he can see in this version. So he's kind of one and done. You don't really see him again. Then you get to Angela, who is a very troubled girl who was basically assaulted by her father in the game. And here we find out that, spoiler alert, Angela is just part of Mary's personality, and she may have still potentially been abused by her father, but that's only really one aspect of her trauma, and it's kind of brushed over. You still do get aspects of Angela from the game, but it's just kind of cherry-picked, much like Eddie. Then you have Laura, who's actually, funnily enough, played by Evie Templeton, who played her in the Silent Hill 2 remake. And while she does get the annoying personality down pat, she basically is just a creepy little girl who has a living, undead baby doll with her. So the character is pretty much just one note, and it's just there to be creepy and kind of taunt James and move him along in the plot. But the side character who I think was done the best would have to be Maria. She is also played by Hannah Emily Anderson, who also plays Angela in the movie as well. And she does have some of the personality from the movie. She is somewhat seductive looking, and you can tell she does have a liking to James. But unlike the game, where there's a slow reveal that she's basically just a manifestation of James's memory of Mary, it's rather rushed and just kind of gone through in about a 20-minute time span. And he pretty much sacrifices her to the Red Pyramid, who is just also a manifestation of James himself. So essentially, the characters in the movie still do serve basically the same purpose as they do in the game, but a very abridged version of it. And honestly, I think they could have just done without Laura, and I'd even cut Eddie out too, and just focused on Angela and Maria. And if you're going to do an abridged version of the story, just lose the little girl and the heavyset guy, and just focus on the more interesting characters. I think the last of the mixed would have to be the creatures themselves. Some of them, such as the Red Pyramid and the nurses, look pretty damn good, and were also featured in the other films. But then you get to ones like the little bug creatures, which look a little uncanny and kind of weird, and then the Spider Mary, which is the probably worst part of the movie, and it's kind of a mixed bag. Some of the creatures, you can tell they had a lot of love and care put into the designs and even ways that they moved and were filmed. And others, it's like, I don't know, we need a scary spider naked creatures thing. Have it crawl around and fight Pinhead. Fuck it. It's not all bad, but it's definitely hit and miss in that category, so it would have to end up here as well. But now on to the negatives. And believe it or not, there's not really a lot that I could put here. I think there's a lot of mixed aspects to this movie, but there's not a lot of things that I downright thought were bad, but there are a few. For instance, some of the CGI and shots in the film look very cheap, and I actually don't blame Christoph Gans for this. The budget of the film was only just over $20 million, which is less than half of the first Silent Hill movie, and you have to understand, that movie came out 20 years ago. So when you take inflation into account, it's really probably more like a third of the original budget. So unfortunately, we have shots that are very clearly green screen, CGI characters such as the Mary Spider, which you just have to see to believe, which look like a PS3 cutscene, and some occasional shots where it just looks like James is running on a green screen There are some bad visuals in this movie. It's not enough to take the whole thing down. I would say overall about 75 to 80% of this movie looks really damn good. But then it feels like they completely ran out of money and said, ah, shit, just do George Lucas level Attack of the Clone CGI. It's fine. That doesn't ruin the movie. But I do think that those scenes do stick out like a sore thumb. And though I think overall it is a really damn good looking movie, there's also some really bad looking parts too. But again, I purely blame the budget, and it's a little more forgiving once you know that. And the last pure negative that I'd have to give the film would be the cult aspect. Now, this film is a loose sequel to the original Silent Hill movie in the terms that it actually acknowledges things like the cult, although it doesn't go into the same members that were in the first film. And I'm pretty sure this film just completely ignores Revelations, since Gans didn't even work on that one. The problem is it doesn't really make sense where this takes place timeline-wise, because there is a brief mention of there being fires under the town, but James lived there probably pretty recently, and I do think they actually showed the date at one point in the movie, and it's modern day. But regardless, that leads into the problem that I have. You find out that Mary is basically, from a young age, been forced to be part of this cult because her father started it. She is periodically poisoned with this liquid that basically makes her bleed from all her pores, and the cult members drink her blood in a ritualistic like sacrifice that they occasionally do. This doesn't kill Mary, but you later find out that's why she's sick and why she's dying. This seems like a very unnecessary addition, and it's just like a way to connect it to the first film instead of it just being cancer like in the video game. It just felt on the nose. I didn't like any of the cult members, and when they were on the screen, I was just like, all right, what are we doing here? Who are these people? What the fuck's happening? And it just kind of takes you out of it. Thankfully, they're only in the film for about, I'd say 10 or so minutes collectively, so it doesn't really ruin anything, but it's the worst parts of the movie, and it could have really just been axed out of the movie and take that time to give us more development of the side characters. That's my basic positive, negatives, and middle-of-the-road aspects of the film. Overall, I'm going to give Return to Silent Hill a 7 out of 10. Now, that may seem high to some, and I understand people's frustrations with this movie. I think I really do. I think people wanted to go into this film and see a relatively true and faithful adaptation of Silent Hill 2. And ultimately, I do understand that. But if you look at the first Silent Hill film, which Christoph Gans also made, you realize that that movie in and of itself is just a loose adaptation of the first game. Pretty damn loose. Yet that film was, for the most part, enjoyed by a lot of Silent Hill fans. However, Return to Silent Hill is kind of getting destroyed by critics and fans alike, and I think it's due to it not being very accurate to the game. Because I honestly don't think this film is god-awful like people are making it out to be, at least not in my opinion. Now, I know if you get objective, there are aspects that don't make sense, and there are aspects that are brushed over, like the side characters. But I still think this is a really atmospheric movie that has the skeleton of the Silent Hill story and a lot of the themes as well as the feeling of those games. It's essentially a condensed version of that story in movie form with enough changes to make it feel different, but not too similar to make it just basically be a one-to-one recreation. And for many, they probably don't like that, and I understand it. I think some people really went into this wanting Silent Hill 2 on the big screen, and I understand that. However, I think we do get that for about half the movie, and the other half is kind of its own thing. But I'm also a big fan of the first Silent Hill film, and that basically did the same thing. About half of that movie is the first game, mind you, with just a female lead, and the other half is kind of its own thing. Now, the part that is true to Silent Hill 2 is the better part, and I do admit I would have preferred a more accurate adaptation. But I think all in all, this is an atmospheric film that does capture two people who do love each other. And even though they're not married in this one, which is a bit of a bummer, and it's not the exact story that we all know and love, it is like an abridged version of it, but I think one that's abridged pretty well. At the end of the day, I like the film, and I thought they did a pretty good job. It's not the movie that we really wanted, but the movie that we got, I think, is still in the essence of that game, and I think it is decent. This is not a great film by any means, but I think it is a good movie. That is definitely not a popular opinion, but I do hope in time this one is kind of reevaluated. It's a hell of a lot better than the second movie, and I think it's about on par with the first. I know I'm kind of alone in that opinion, but I do enjoy the film, and I think Return to Silent Hill is a decent, although not great, recapturing of the second game, and one that I do enjoy. I thank you all for watching. This has been a fun trip into that foggy, hellish town, and hopefully we'll get more great Silent Hill games in the future. This is probably it for the movies for a while, but I did enjoy the adaptation, and I do recommend the film. I'd say give it a chance, and you might find yourself enjoying it as well, despite some of the more glaring problems. Thank you all for watching.